This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, so we're taking a deep dive today into one of the most controversial moments in U.S. history, Japanese internment during World War II.
Right.
A lot of people want to understand the reasoning behind it.
Absolutely.
And I think the best way to do that is to go straight to the source.
Yeah.
So we're looking at Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt's 1943 report to the U.S. Army Chief of Staff.
Interesting.
This document was key in shaping this policy.
Okay.
And, well, let me tell you, it's a wild ride.
I bet.
So what really jumps out at me when I read through this report is how DeWitt tries to present this internment as this unavoidable military necessity,
Right.
even though we know it kind of went against what the FBI was saying at the time.
That's what's so striking about it.
Really?
Yeah. Even J. Edgar Hoover himself pushed back against the idea of mass evacuation.
Wow.
Stating that there was no real evidence of Japanese-American disloyalty or any plans for sabotage.
So they were just like, no, we're good.
Pretty much, but DeWitt went ahead anyway.
Wow. Okay, so let's dig into DeWitt's argument a little bit here.
Okay.
One of his main claims is that there were just all these Japanese Americans on the West Coast.
Yeah, he uses some pretty big numbers, too.
Right.
Saying there were over 115,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living there.
Wow.
Many near what he called sensitive installations.
Oh, so he's framing it as if they're a threat just by being there?
Almost like their very presence was a problem.
Right. And it doesn't stop there, right? He brings up Japanese American organizations, too.
He does. And he heavily implies that these organizations were somehow in line with Japan's war aims.
Right.
Well, we have to remember that, racial prejudice was deeply ingrained in American society at the time.
Absolutely.
And DeWitt really played on these existing stereotypes to get what he wanted.
It's almost like he's saying you can't trust them because of their heritage, even though many were American citizens.
Exactly, and it gets worse.
Oh.
He even uses their cultural and religious practices as evidence against them.
Really? Like what?
He, uses phrases like dual citizenship, which didn't even exist.
Right.
And he calls out things like Buddhist gatherings and Japanese language schools.
Wait, hold on. He actually says that.
Yeah.
It's like he's just picking and choosing whatever fits his narrative.
He even twists ceremonies honoring the Japanese emperor.
Oh, wow.
Or Japanese Americans sending money back to Japan.
Which, a lot of immigrant communities did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He twists it into proof that they're loyal to Japan rather than the U.S.
That's unbelievable.
It's pretty astounding how he manipulates all these details.
So if the FBI wasn't even finding any evidence of espionage,
Right.
What examples does DeWitt give? Anything concrete?
That's the thing. He uses very vague language about potential threats, but he never gives any real solid evidence
Really?
of actual sabotage or espionage.
So it's all just speculation.
Basically fear-mongering.
You know what's really disturbing to me?
Was
He actually boasts about how efficiently the evacuations went.
Yeah,
And even highlights the supposed economic benefits
I know.
of getting rid of Japanese Americans from their farms and businesses.
It's like he saw this forced removal as an opportunity.
He talks about, finding new operators for Japanese American farms. It's crazy. And meanwhile, the impact on the Japanese American community was absolutely devastating.
Devastating.
We're talking families forced from their homes, losing their property, imprisoned without trial.
Awful.
It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a complete violation of their basic rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
It's just
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Crazy.
wild stuff.
And this is where it gets really interesting
Yeah.
when you start to look at how historians have interpreted all this.
Right, because even with all the evidence,
Yeah.
you still have some historians who saw internment as a
I know.
necessary wartime measure.
Yeah, the realists.
Really, even with the blatant racism and lack of evidence?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
So their argument is that after Pearl Harbor, there was so much chaos and anxiety,
Sure.
they say the government had to focus on national security,
Okay.
even if it meant, limiting some individual liberties.
So basically better safe than sorry.
Pretty much.
Even if it meant putting thousands of innocent people in prison.
Exactly.
It's a hard pill to swallow.
It is, and it's a perspective that a lot of revisionist historians really disagree with.
Right. They would say this was more than just overreacting.
Totally.
It was driven by something much darker.
Way darker.
Racial prejudice.
Exactly.
It makes sense. I mean, we were at war with Italy and Germany, too.
Right.
But we didn't round up all the Italian Americans and German Americans.
Exactly. The revisionists argue that Japanese Americans were targeted.
Yeah.
Specifically because of their race and ancestry, not because they were an actual threat.
It's like DeWitt needed a scapegoat.
Yeah.
And sadly, Japanese Americans are an easy target.
Unfortunately, and the speed at which this all happened is really telling, too.
Oh, yeah.
Public opinion was so easily swayed by all this fear-mongering and these racist stereotypes that had been building for years.
And DeWitt's report just plays right into that.
Totally. He even goes so far as to say that the Japanese-American community itself was a threat.
Wow.
No matter what individual people believed.
So he's painting them as like the single unit?
Right, this monolithic group.
Like they can't think for themselves.
Exactly, incapable of individual thought.
This is scary stuff.
Yeah.
Because you could replace Japanese American with any group.
I know.
And it could happen again.
Absolutely fierce, scapegoating erosion of civil liberties.
It's a chilling thought.
It is,
Yeah.
and that's why it's so important to understand the history.
Yeah.
The forces at play, the choices that were made.
So we don't repeat them.
Exactly, because condemning what happened isn't enough.
Right.
We have to learn from it.
Yeah.
We have to recognize the warning signs.
And be on guard.
Exactly. Be vigilant.
You mentioned earlier that some historians see this as part of this larger pattern
Yes.
of anti-Asian sentiment
Yeah, in America.
in America.
Yeah, critical race theory, for example.
Okay.
They view the internment as part of a long history of anti-Asian racism
Uh-huh.
in the U.S. They point to things like the Chinese Exclusion Act,
Oh, yeah. Back in 1882,
1882, and the Immigration Act of 1924.
which limited immigration.
Severely restricted immigration from Asian countries.
So they're saying that internment wasn't just a one-time thing,
Yeah.
but like a culmination
Yeah.
of decades of discrimination
Exactly.
based on racist ideologies.
Absolutely. They saw Asian immigrants as a threat to American society.
And all these earlier policies
Yeah.
made it easier to justify what happened during the war
Right. It's like they laid the groundwork.
for discrimination.
For sure.
Wow. It's like DeWitt's report.
Yeah.
Just tapped into all this pre-existing fear and prejudice that
Yeah.
had been building for years.
A long time.
It makes you wonder if there were other motives at play
Right.
besides just racism.
Like what?
Well, that's where the new left historians come in.
All right.
They bring economics into the picture,
Interesting.
arguing that some white farmers and businesses actually benefited
Oh, what?
from Japanese Americans being forced out.
So you're saying it wasn't just about racial prejudice, but also about money.
Yeah, they argue that suddenly all this prime farmland became available
Right.
and businesses were sold off at a loss.
Businesses forced to sell.
Forced to sell.
They're cheap.
Japanese Americans lost everything,
Everything.
while some white Americans got rich.
Yeah. Profited directly.
It's a cynical view,
Definitely.
but you can't ignore it.
No.
Yeah.
Especially when you see how quickly
Right.
Japanese American property was taken away.
And redistributed.
Exactly.
That's why it's so important to consider all these different sides of the story.
I agree.
It's not about saying one is right or wrong,
Yeah.
but about getting a more complete understanding.
A more nuanced understanding of this complex event.
Exactly.
Man, it's a lot to take in.
I know.
This one document
Yeah,
reveals so much about what was going on back then.
absolutely.
You know, the fear, the prejudice,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that people were willing to just
Yeah.
throw away the rights
Yeah.
of an entire group of people.
Based on nothing.
Yeah, just assumptions and stereotypes.
It's crazy.
And it's not ancient history.
No, not at all.
I mean, there are people alive today
Yeah.
whose families were torn apart by this, whose
Mhm.
lives were totally changed.
And we can't forget their stories.
Absolutely. Their stories need to be heard.
They do.
They need to be
For
remembered.
sure.
And it just makes you think,
Yeah.
like, what can we do to
Uh.
make sure this never happens again?
Well, I think it starts with education.
Education.
Yeah, understanding our history,
Uh-huh.
both the good and the bad,
Yeah.
is so important.
Right.
You know, we have to be aware of the patterns
Okay.
of prejudice and discrimination
They keep happening. They keep popping up
over and over again.
throughout history.
And we have to be willing to challenge them.
Yeah. Wherever we see them.
It's like that saying,
What's that?
those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly. We can't forget what happened.
Japanese Americans.
Yeah. During World War II.
We just can't
No.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Yes.
Question everything.
Question assumptions.
Demand more from our leaders.
Absolutely. We have to be able to see
Yeah.
when people are being scapegoated.
When they're being targeted.
Yeah. And we have to be willing to speak out.
Against injustice.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah, even when it's not popular.
Exactly.
And I think it's also about empathy.
Empathy.
Putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand what it was like.
To be marginalized.
To be the target.
Yeah. To be the
We have to remember that our freedoms are connected.
They're all connected.
You know, an attack on one group is an attack on all of us.
Absolutely. Understanding that is crucial.
So DeWitt's report, as messed up as it is, can actually be a good thing?
A good thing.
In a way.
How so?
It can be a tool for learning.
Okay.
For reflection.
I see what you mean.
It makes us face some hard truths about our past.
About who we are.
And hopefully it can help us do better in the future.
I think so. I really do.
I'm left with this mix of emotions.
I get
Anger, sadness.
Yeah.
But also this sense of responsibility.
Responsibility.
We can't let this be forgotten.
We can't brush it under the rug.
These injustices have to be acknowledged.
Absolutely.
They have to be talked about.
They have to be remembered.
This isn't just about remembering the past. It's about using it.
Using it to make things better.
To make a more just future.
A more equitable future.
For everyone.
Everyone.
And for those of you listening, I hope this deep dive
I hope so.
give you a new perspective.
A new way of thinking about things.
On this really dark part of American history.
It's a story that needs to be told.
It needs to be remembered.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, it needs to be learned from
it does.
The fight for justice.
Yes.
The fight for equality.
Yeah. It's ongoing.
It's not over.
It continues.
And we all have a part to play.
We all have a role.
We have to keep fighting.
For a better future.
For everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.